Hello, and welcome back to our nightly edition of This Day in History, where we take a specific day in history and take a look back at the events of that day, the historic context in which those events took place, and the historic ramifications of those events. And we take a look at some people that were born on that day and some people that died on that day. Although on occasion we may do one event, one person that was born, and one person that died, or any combination of the three. We also, if you have not yet, would like it if you hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without further ado, this day in history, March 31st. And on this day in 1985, in Madison Square Garden in New York City, the first WrestleMania occurred. This event was put on, of course, by the company that is now World Wrestling Entertainment, but at the time was the World Wrestling Federation. And it was a huge success. It was not broadcast on pay-per-view, as WrestleManias primarily 3 through the current day have been, but on closed circuit television. And over 1 million people watched it on closed circuit television. And it was a huge financial success for Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. Vince McMahon freely admits that if this had not been a success, if this event had not succeeded in the way it did, he would have had to declare bankruptcy and he would have been done. He would have been finished. Because he had this huge ambition of taking what had been a regional business based on regional promotions around the country on a national basis through the growing medium of cable television and syndication. And it was obviously a success. The World Wrestling Federation successor, World Wrestling Entertainment, is still around today, and Vince McMahon is still calling the shots. And one thing McMahon did with this show that was revolutionary and would become this show's trait was the involvement of celebrities, and it gave it credibility. Mr. T was involved in the main event. He wrestled in the main event. Mr. T was on the highest rated show on television at the time, The A-Team. You also had the involvement of Muhammad Ali as a special guest referee in the main event. You had Liberace as a ring announcer. You had Billy Martin as the timekeeper of the main event. Billy Martin in New York was royalty. I mean, he had been manager of the Yankees many times and fired by George Steinbrenner as many times as he had been hired. And you also had the involvement in the women's match of Wendy Richter and Cyndi Lauper, and the Rock and Wrestling connection. So this show is just a huge success for McMahon and the company. They have WrestleManias to this day. The next one is occurring this Sunday, and it'll be the first one held without an audience, obviously in response to the coronavirus that is sweeping the world and the country. But this event is usually held these days in a massive stadium, stadiums that host the Super Bowl, and McMahon likes to host it before the Super Bowl or right after the Super Bowl and have a bigger crowd than the Super Bowl. That's always his goal, is to have a larger crowd at WrestleMania than the stadiums hosting the Super Bowl. 2 years after this event, he would stage an event with a reported crowd of over 103,000. And that record would not be topped by a professional wrestling promotion with an event inside the United States until the year 2016, when WrestleMania emanated from AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas. So just a huge cultural phenomenon that was started on this day. And in the main event, you had Hulk Hogan and Mr. T less than 12 hours after appearing on Saturday Night Live to promote the main event, defeating Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff in the main event. Now, I obviously know that they knew they were going to win. I mean, I understand it's predetermined, but this this event is always one of the events and highlights of the calendar for me. So, the first one this day in 1985. Fun fact, the fourth and fifth edition of this event would be hosted at a casino in Atlantic City. Now, you can no longer go to that casino because the stable genius that owned that casino bankrupted it. But that's a story for another day. Births that occurred on this day. In 1948, in Washington, D.C., Albert Gore Jr. was born. He was the second child born to Albert Gore Sr., who was a representative and senator for 18 years from Tennessee. Mr. Gore would go on to some success in politics himself, serving in the United States House of Representatives. He would also serve in the United States Senate from Tennessee. He would become vice president and serve for 8 years under President Bill Clinton, and came within 538 votes in the state of Florida, becoming the 43rd president of the United States of America in 2000. Now Gore is a Nobel Prize winner and presents a nice PowerPoint presentation on the consequences of climate change, and has won an Oscar for it as well. So he's an Oscar winner and a Nobel Prize winner. Gore is one of those more peculiar figures in American politics. He's a former vice president, and he usually pokes his head up around elections. So I'm sure we'll see Mr. Gore at some point this election season, and he'll poke his head down again and won't be seen again for 4 more years. Former vice presidents are really peculiar characters if they don't ascend to the top job. They are almost always forgotten, no matter how close they got to the top job. Gore was always seen as a stiff, kind of as a really boring guy. But it came out in 2008 that Gore and Tipper Gore, his wife of many years, were getting a divorce. And Al was getting a divorce because he'd been a naughty boy with a massage therapist, and that was why they were getting a divorce. So, not to pillory Gore, though, for all his sins, and make fun of Gore in every possible way. I think Al Gore's advocacy on climate change is a really noble thing and a really enduring legacy for him to hang his hat on. And, you know, if I wanted to make a video on what I think would have happened had those votes in Florida went the other way, that would be another video for another time and a whole lot longer video. Because I think I think 9/11 still would have happened. I don't buy into this argument that 9/11 only happened because Bush was president. I don't buy that. I think 9/11 was coming no matter who won the 2000 election. But I do think the response may have been different. I don't think we would have went to Iraq for sure. I'll see you all tomorrow. Good night.